forged between President Trump and Russian autocrat Putin at the G20.
And Jordan.
The King of Jordan as well. And the question is that a positive development? You think that perhaps is counterintuitive, but Bolton was none too sanguine about both the duration of the ceasefire and whether this was a positive step in terms of American presence in the region, fomenting stability as opposed to Russian presence in the region, propping up a war criminal and fomenting continued instability. So let's see if we can get a second opinion that agrees with that. And on the topic is our friend Jed Babbin, who, of course, is a Washington Times and American Spectator contributor, as well as a former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense during the George H.W. administration. And, Jed, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, guys.
So in your piece in, where was it, the Washington Times, I believe, you talk about Trump drawing a new red line in Syria and distinguish that from the red line that Obama drew. What's the distinction?
Well, the distinction is that Trump, number one, has already enforced a red line against chemical weapons, the one that Obama drew and then didn't decide to enforce. But Trump now has an opportunity, really an obligation, to draw a second red line. If you look at what's going on in Syria, I mean, we're going to be withdrawing there soon. I mean, Raqqa is going to fall. The Kurds are going to withdraw. We're going to withdraw. At some point, we're going to be basically out of there. So there's not going to be any constraints on Assad using chemical weapons or the Russians doing what they do. And if you look at the geography, if you just look at Syria, you look to the north. Well, Turkey is not going to allow the Kurds to form an independent state, which is what they wanted since World War I. It's not going to happen. To the east is Iraq, and Iraq is already pretty much of a mess, although there's progress there against ISIS as well, albeit temporary.
In Mosul, right?
In Mosul. And, that's going to be something that's going to come and go. To the west, you have Lebanon and Israel. I mean, pretty much not Iraq, but Iran already owns Lebanon through Hezbollah. And the only real target they have now, if they want to start their hybrid warfare with little green men again, which is what they're going to do, the place they're going to go is Jordan, to the south. And Jordan is a very important ally of ours. They're pretty usually reliable. The king, Abdullah, is someone who is very much on our side. The problem they have, of course, is about a quarter of their population, or a fifth of their population, I should say, is so-called Palestinian refugees. They're registered by the UN as Palestinian refugees. They're not refugees at all. They're descendants of the refugees from 1948 who fled Israel at the time of Israel's independence. But those people are pretty well ripe for the sort of incitement that you see all the time in the Arab and Islamic world. And certainly ISIS and Iran and Russia and Syria are going to join in and try to get that going there. So what we need to do, Mr. Trump needs to do, is draw a second red line and say the red line is the border of Jordan. We're going to defend Jordan, and we're not going to let you pull that stuff off.
What about the Syrian ceasefire that was forged and the importance of that?
Well, I think forged is the right word because nobody really believes in it, and it's not going to last very long. Again, the Syrian ceasefire is going to last only as long as our troops and our air power is present, are present. So you're not going to see that last very long. Again, we're going to withdraw once Raqqa is taken, once ISIS is fallen and supposedly kicked out of Syria. There's no reason for us to stay. So the temporary ceasefire is going to be very temporary.
So has a deal been cut between Russia and with Turkey to basically cut out the Kurds, which would leave them what? Antagonistic, or what? Where does that leave them, and what about Turkey-Russia relations in the context of the ceasefire now?
Well, we have to look at the treaty that Turkey and Russia and Iran signed. And note this, that Syria didn't even sign it. about a month and a half ago, the three nations, signed a treaty on protecting the Assad regime, on protecting the so-called sovereignty of Syria. So Turkey is going to use military power to the extent they need to kick the Kurds out of there once we withdraw. And there's no interest in Russia or Turkey or Iran in doing anything other than continuing expansion in that area.
Is there...
So Turkey... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but some of Rexon's controversial comments over the weekend in response to the meeting with Putin and Trump is kind of, Russia and the U.S. want the same things, and we're trying to figure out how to get there, that we're taken with, they're taken askance by some. Did you read anything into that where there perhaps is a play in the not-too-distant future to get Russian agreement to replace Assad and, replace him with somebody that would have the imprimatur of Iran, but replace Assad nonetheless?
No. I mean, you can't read it that way.
Okay.
You just simply can't. Well, what happened at the G20 is pretty much irrelevant and going to be so temporary as to be ephemeral. So the basic point here is Russia is going to continue what it's always done from the time of, 17th century, Peter the Great. They want to expand. They're going to try to expand, and Iran is part of their vehicle. Turkey is part of their vehicle. And Assad is just a placeholder. They may at some time replace him, but we're not going to have someone there who's any less a terrorist leader than Assad if they decide to replace him.
So then
there's nothing in there.
So then did Putin get the upper hand on Trump from the meeting and that outcome?
Sounds like it.
Well, I think in part, yeah. I think President Trump is still, quite frankly, learning the job. Everything in on-the-job training is, I hope, sinking in. But Mr. Putin has been doing this all his life, and Mr. Trump hasn't. So I don't think that it's really a very big loss for us, but it's certainly not a win. And whatever came out of that G20 meeting is going to disappear by the time of the next G20 meeting, and probably sooner.
How about a lesser adversary, at least in terms of skill level, and that's Kim Jong-un and the North Korean dictatorship. What's your assessment of how Trump is handling the missile testing and the heightened security concern North Korea poses?
Well, I think so far so good, but I challenge your first statement. He's certainly not a lesser adversary, and I don't think there's any lesser of intelligence or learning there. I think that the biggest threat we face right now is North Korea. They have a missile which can be nuclear armed, which can now reach on a flatter trajectory than they fired on July 4th. It could reach Alaska. It might even be able to reach some other places. Certainly can reach Japan and South Korea. So this is a nuclear threat, and this is something that the president's going to have to deal with. The problem is we don't have much of a means to deal with it. Thanks to a couple of decades of neglect and failure to act, we're now in a situation where China and North Korea have us in this sort of strategic headlock, and we're going to try to break out of that. But you can't. The normal options of military action or essential, large-scale diplomatic action are neither open to us. Neither of them are. I mean, if we wanted to start a war there, we'd have to be absolutely insane. I mean, just the city of Seoul has about 10 million people, well, 20 million if you count the suburbs, and all of them are in range of North Korean artillery and rocket attack. And those people, most of them, or at least a large section of them, would probably die in the first day of the war.
Does China see this? Does China see this man, this chubby psychopath, as a stable partner over the years, or? Yeah,
well, and not just over the years. I mean, if you look at the missile and the way it was launched, you look at the features of that missile. Just for example, I'm aware of the fact that the nose cone in which a nuclear weapon could ride was either manufactured. Well, it was not manufactured in North Korea. It was probably manufactured either in China or in Pakistan and sold to the North Koreans. We have evidence that the rocket engines on the first stage of the rocket are Russian design. So you see these things. You see, the fact that mobile missile launchers, not for that particular missile, but for others, the North Koreans have, were not made in North Korea either. The fact remains that China is probably looking at North Korea as a nation that's doing what it wants done. I don't think that there's really any enmity there, and, it may be at some point that the Chinese decide to replace Kim Jong-un with a more pliable puppet. But I don't think that they really have much of a problem with what he's doing right now. So relying on them to change Kim Jong-un's behavior is just foolhardy.
And that's certainly been shown to be true to this point. He is Jed Babbin, former United States Deputy Undersecretary of Defense and a contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator. Jed, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.